Hey everyone, and welcome to the 11th episode of my Launchpad tutorial series. In this episode, we're going to learn about the frame motion technique, which will allow us to create more complex movements with our arpeggiators. I want to create a light effect that starts from the outside of the Launchpad and spirals into the inside of the Launchpad. I'll start by adding an arpeggiator and assigning it to this button. This will be our starting point for the effect. For starters, we're going to go up. This is the first segment of our spiral. When our arpeggiator reaches this top point, we should trigger another arpeggiator that will now make it move towards the left. So the naive way to do it would be to add a MIDI effect track after our arpeggiator, create one chain that lets the lower notes pass through, and then create one chain for this key at the top for our new arpeggiator. But we cannot actually do that, because if we do that, then we break the arpeggiator rule. We have one arpeggiator after an arpeggiator, and it's going to bug out if we're playing it while recording. So this is not the way to do it. Instead, we have to trigger this arpeggiator on a delay. First, I will lower the step by 1 on my first segment. So I will delay my second arpeggiator by 7 notes and then start from here. Let's group this arpeggiator and then duplicate it. This is going to be our second arpeggiator. It's going to start all the way up top. Now I can't use the steps anymore because I need to cross the gap in the middle. So instead, I will use a chord. This arpeggiator should be moving to the left instead of to the right, so let's change it to move to the left. And now we have to delay it by these 7 notes. Since our rate is 1/64, we need to multiply that by 7 in order to get the delay length. So let's add 2 note lengths here. So we're going to change that to 164, and we will need 700% here. So we're going to multiply this by 2. Now at 132, we will need 350%. And if you multiply this once again, now we need 175% in order to reach 4 times 1 out of 64. The second note length triggers on note off, and it can be of any length. Now the second arpeggiator will trigger as soon as the first one is done. If you're unsure whether you did this all correctly, you can lower the BPM in order to slow down the arpeggiators. The next segment will go down from here. So I will just duplicate this chain and change the parameters. So now I have to wait for a total of 14 notes before I start my third arpeggiator. So I need 1 divided by 64 at 1400%. That means I can just multiply this one more time and keep the gate the same. Then I will adjust my pitch, and since I'm only going downwards without crossing any gaps, I can use the steps function. Similarly, I will create the fourth segment, but this time I have 21 notes to wait for. So that's 1 out of 64 at 2100%. So let's start over. This is going to be at 2100%, but the limit is 200%. So we keep multiplying this by 2. Now we're at 1050%. Now we're at 525%. And now I'm probably gonna need to get a calculator pretty soon, but I think we're at 262.5%. And now we're at 131.25%. I also have to use a chord now, because I have to cross the gap and get rid of the steps counter. And additionally, I will change the arpeggiator style to up, so we can go to the right once more. And now we got an effect that rotates around. This is slightly tedious because of all the calculations for the note lengths, and at some point you're just going to run out of space. The length can only go up to 1 out of 4, and the gate can only go up to 200%. While this can be used for some smaller effects, it is not really practical for making larger effects. There's a different technique called the frame motion technique that lets us create larger effects without this limitation. So now I'll go ahead and recreate the same spinner with the frame motion technique. First, you add a single arpeggiator with your settings, and then you add a chord before it and give it as many notes as there are in your effect. Our effect has 28 notes total, so we're going to create 28 notes in ascending order by using 2 chords. If we now press the button, we have 28 notes ascending directly up. With the frame motion technique, we will individually move each of these notes into its correct position. So we add a MIDI effect track after our arpeggiator, and then we can start creating the effect. The first note is in its position, so we will just create an empty chain for it. Right here. The next note should be moved to the right, so we will create a pitch for it and pitch it 3 to the right. So now we are having a small movement upwards. We can now repeat the same for the next note. Now we need to move it an additional 3 to the right. That's 6. For the fourth note, we also have to move it an additional 3. That's 9. Do you see the pattern? If I just keep duplicating this and adding 3, I get a nice clean upwards movement. And we have the right hand side of our effect. Now we will start moving this over to the left. So now let's see where our note is at. Our note is here, so let's start moving it to the left. And now it's here. For the next note, we want to move it to the left. But now it goes back to the right. Let's move it 2 to the left. You can again notice a pattern here. If we move it 2 to the left, it'll start going to the left. Be careful when crossing the gap though, because now, if we go 2 to the left, we're actually going to end up back down here. So we need to manually adjust this note in order to cross the gap with it. Now that we've crossed the gap, we can use this new pitch as our base. Now for the next note, we just want to go down, so let's put it a bit down, see if it works. 2 more. Now we're going towards the bottom. The next note needs to go 5 down. And then we can just repeat this pattern for the next notes. Finally, we need to move it to the right. And now we can notice a pattern. We do not have to change the number at all. So we don't need to have multiple chains here. We can just generalize this movement for all of these notes, because the arpeggiator itself is moving towards the right. Be careful when crossing the gap, however. This segment needs to be manually adjusted. There we go. This is a bit more tedious because you have to input all of the numbers for each note individually, but it can also be a lot more powerful because now you can add chords to it. So for example, for the first note, I can create a chord and make it 3 upwards. So now I get this note additionally at the start. I can move this chord over here and keep it there. So now I have another arpeggiator going upwards that follows my pattern. Note that we cannot generalize this chord like the pitch on the bottom because it depends on the pitch that's before it. Now we can keep moving to the left here. Let's create a chord here and let's see which value we need. Our arpeggiator goes up here and it should be down here. So that's 5 down from where it is right now. That comes to -2. Now let's copy this over again. Now, if it becomes slightly hard to see, you can give it a different velocity by moving this here a bit. And now we can see where it is. It has a purple light shining right there. We need to move it 5 down again in order to move it down here. And then you can restore this value back to 1. Now we need to cross the gap, so let's make sure we're crossing it properly. And now since this movement is already going to the left, we do not have to change our chord anymore. We can use the same value for a little bit before we need to start going down again. So now I need to go down again, but be careful. Now our previous effect has crossed the gap here, and now the pitch is a lot lower. In order to compensate, I'm just going to reset this chord and see where the note will be at. Looks like the note's over here. We need it to be here. So let's keep moving it down. Now it's in the correct position. Let's keep moving it. Looks like our note goes here. Now our note's here. There you go. Now it's back down. keep moving it down. Now this value is the same because at this point, the other effect is already going downwards. And now we need to do the final movement towards the right. Let's see where our note is at. Oh, it goes down here. So we should move it up. There we go. And now we need to cross this gap. So let's reset this to 0. And see where we are at. We are actually right here, and we need to go pretty far to the right in order to cross the gap. There we go. Now we cross the gap. Reset this back. And that's our last note, because we start from here. Now we can add another spiral in this segment and then this segment by simply adding to the chord that already exists. So I'm going to start by giving it +6, so we start from here as well. Now I can just keep giving it +6 until it reaches this top point. Now I need to move it 1 to the left. Because our note is here, this actually means 5 down in order to move to the left. Now we are crossing the gap already, so let's put a really low value on it, give it a color. Okay, we're down there. Let's keep going down. There you go, we crossed the gap. Starting at 32. Let's try and get 32 once more. Looks like we're up here. And now we cannot actually reach our destination. Our destination is supposed to be here, but there's no way to reach it. How do you work around this? You will group this chord. And instead of using a shift here, we're going to use another pitch down here and do it by -37. So this here pitch acts basically the same as a chord. This chord will let the original pitch pass through and the pitch of the second spiral, and this here pitch is going to allow the third spiral to process properly and bypass the chord's limit. Let's see if we need to do this for this note as well. Looks like we do. We need to go all the way down here, and we simply don't have the range for that. So I'm going to copy this whole rack over. Remember the first shift, it was -7. Change the first shift to -7, and then change the pitch to something lower. There we go, we're going down again. First pitch was -35, so now we have crossed the gap here. But we haven't crossed the gap with the main pitch. Again, make sure to remember the first value was -35. Copy that, and then we can play around with the pitch. First value is 35. We already have that, so we don't need to change it. Alright, now we are down here. We need one more in order to get over to the right. The first one was -35, which is alright. And we need to move towards the right. That gets us moving. And now we need to cross the gap, so we probably do not need this chord anymore. Let's see what we get. We are down here, which means we need to go a little bit up. There we go. We do not need the special grouping setup anymore. And that was our last note. So that's that part of the spiral. And then there's only the inner part left. That's these two notes. And then we have to cross the gap immediately over here. Let's try putting some really low value. There we go. We found that note. And then there's just one more left. Down there. And now we got our spiral effect. Let's give it all a color and some length. Now we took a fair amount of time, but we have created this fairly complex light effect. I hope this tutorial helped you learn how to make really complex effects using just a single arpeggiator. It is a little bit tedious, but this is the best way to create complex effects using chain lights. If you have any questions about this, please feel free to leave them in the comments and I will answer right away. Thank you for watching. Bye!